Dungeons. What is a dungeon? Where can you find dungeons? Can you live in a dungeon? Who builds dungeons and why? How do you become the master of dungeons? Am I a dungeon? Are you a dungeon? I am become dungeon, destroyer of worlds. Those are all important questions to ask, but the first question I ask myself whenever I'm building a dungeon is what is its purpose in the narrative? Am I running a dungeon crawl in which the entire campaign might focus around this singular dungeon, or does this dungeon merely exist as a component in a larger campaign? In the case of using a dungeon as part of a larger campaign, you then need to decide if this dungeon is merely a step along the path, Moria in Lord of the Rings, or if it is the end goal, the Lonely Mountain in The Hobbit. If it is the end goal, it's very important to build up the boss of this lair. We need a Schmaug to be sitting on the dwarves' hoard for them to try to end defeat. If the dungeon is interstitial tissue, what then is the party's objective? Is there some artifact they need to retrieve from this dungeon, or do the party merely need to travel through it to make the 4-day journey to the other side unnoticed? Just by answering these questions, you already know a lot about your dungeon. You probably have a decent idea about how many sessions you want it to be, and from that we can then determine how many rooms and encounters the dungeon should have. Now, of course, an important question is the origin of your dungeon. In our modern, in my case American world, there are not many massive, uninhabited underground complexes full of magic, gold, and monsters. And even in the historical analog in Europe, such complexes scarcely exist, and scant few are full of monsters or gold or magic. Aside from perhaps those burial chambers of the pharaohs in Egypt, there aren't really all that many actual dungeons in the real world at all. And while they do have gold, they still lack magic and monsters. Even if we accept a world of magic and of monsters, it is still a stretch to accept such complexes exist and are commonplace. And yet, they are core to fantasy, core to the hobby as played around the table. It's half the name of the game. Donjon, the French word from which English dungeon derives, refers to a dark underground prison.
Also, you know what they call
dungeons
in Paris? What they call it?
Donjon.
Donjon.
Man, it's like those French guys have a whole other language. Yeah.
In your typical medieval story, a dungeon is merely the place our hero languishes while imprisoned and is not a place of exploration and adventure. Such a donjon would exist while only attached to a castle, which is the sort of location it would be more logical to explore. So when Dave Arneson came to Gary Gygax in 1972 with this revolutionary idea for a game based on Gary's medieval wargaming rules, they went with dungeons. And I will admit, castles and dragons is a much less catchy name. So because of a quirk of language originating in the 14th century in France, we now have this incredibly ahistoric idea of numerous underground complexes full of gold, monsters, and magic. How then can we explain the origin of a dungeon in our game? Dwarves. Dwarves built it, it's that easy, you're welcome. Seriously though, dwarves are not a bad go-to answer, specifically if you want your dungeon to be subterranean, and in the sort of form factor we expect from a dungeon. What species originally builds a dungeon will have a massive impact on the overall structure, form, and material. Humans build castles, so if you want a human dungeon, set it in an abandoned castle. A kobold lair might be an intricate system of mine shafts that can lead to a dragon's hoard. A mind flayer colony is likely a subterranean living complex with fleshy membranes for walls. Now, the inhabitants of a dungeon do not need to be, and I think in many cases should not be, the original architects. In the case of a shorter dungeon, I think it's a good idea to pick a singular species to be the primary inhabitant of a dungeon. Political interplay is also really interesting, so for slightly longer dungeons, I'll introduce a few other major species to create conflict. This gives the players the opportunity to play one group against another, if they so choose. Dungeon's primary inhabitants should not be its sole inhabitants, so I like to have at least one unrelated creature in addition to several typical dungeon monsters, things like undead, constructs, oozes, etc. Let's take a look back at what we have so far, which will help us save a lot of time in the actual design stage. Our first question, dungeon crawl versus shorter form dungeons. End goal versus step along the path. Second question, how many sessions and encounters do we want this dungeon to take? Third, who built this dungeon originally, and maybe why? Fourth, who currently inhabits it. For the purposes of this video, I'm going to give you a guided example, and for entirely selfish reasons, I already know all of the answers to these questions. If you are one of my current players, go ahead and turn this video off here. We're recording our D&D games, and this dungeon is going to be the first major piece of content they go through. More info on that later. For now, let's look at those questions. This dungeon is just going to be part of a larger campaign, and the objective is just getting from point A to point B through it. We want this to take about 3 sessions, was originally built by dwarves. But not just any dwarves, the Valir, the Steel Dwarves, masters of constructs. I've decided that its current inhabitants are kobolds, because I always go with goblins, and you can really only use kobolds at low levels. The party will attempt to go through the Hall of Zonagar, which lies in Barental, the City of Steel. The Hall of Zonagar was where all of the Steel Dwarves that were busy mining Valira, the true metal, would stay. The next most obvious thing we need is a map. As a modern DM, you have tons of different options, from Donjon, not the word from earlier of service, which can randomly create entire maps with encounters based on certain criteria you feed it. Dungeon Scrawl, which lets you make a fully custom map, which can be really useful, if somewhat time-consuming, or independent artists like Tavern Tales, who offer tons of free, high-quality maps on Patreon. Links to all of these will be in the description below. I've used all of these kinds of different options before, and the best value for time proposition is definitely an independent artist like Tavern Tales, assuming you can find a map that will suit your purposes. The only downside is that they tend to make encounter maps and not whole dungeon maps, meaning we'd probably need to sequence several together, so instead I'm going to use Dungeon Scrawl because it gives me the most freedom to actually design. Okay, so my first idea for this dungeon was to have the main hall where the dwarves used to meet and eat. And there are these enormous 8-foot wide stone tables, and there's one that's turned on its side in the middle of the room that sort of acts as an impromptu palisade for the kobolds. And the next thing is that there is a fork in the path. So there is a little mine, and then right now I am making the armory. The players are probably going to be really interested in getting to this armory, and there's going to be tons of cool, interesting stuff inside. And then the other thing, I was like, there needs to be some sleeping quarters, so that's what I think that room right there is going to be. And then next, there is going to be the sort of main hall, and I wanted to have it be an interesting shape. There's a lot of different branching paths from it. So next I'm working on a sort of a refinery. Right here is what I'm imagining is sort of the kobold excavations, right? Because the kobolds, they sort of have their own territory, which is sort of natural caverns, and there's probably a pathway that continues on from there. But the kobolds have found a couple different entry points. I'm not certain what I want to do with these other rooms, but it's also a good idea just to have interesting dungeon rooms, right? And next I'm working on the sort of sleeping quarters where for the leaders of this place. They could technically go through the way the kobolds came in, but I'm going to probably talk a little bit later about kobolds and the possible diplomacy with them. I've gone ahead and made some significant changes to it, sort of finalized the design. One thing that I've added is I've added room numbers, and I've also made a document with the notes for the whole dungeon. So I've labeled all of the rooms. So this first room here is the main hall. I've added some box texts. This one reads, "In the deserted hall, the huge stone tablets dominate the space. Well worn with age, each table is some 8 feet wide, 30 feet long, and over a foot thick. One table lies sidewise, effectively blocking the hallway halfway through." That's this sort of table here, and these are the other tables. There's probably some enormous drag marks, right, where this table, because something big moved that table from being over here-ish to being sort of blocking the middle of the passageway. The sort of left fork from the way that they are coming in is the path of the kobolds. Here is the kitchen, the kitchens, a little description for it. And so there are kobolds behind, starting in the first room, there's kobolds. The kobolds are hiding behind this palisade, and they're going to sort of react to the party in one way or another, depending upon how the players act. And then I want it to be clear to the players which way the kobolds are. So one kobold is going to flee no matter what, whether it is one of like the tough kobolds fleeing because the fight turns out to be too tough and I need to take it a little easier on them, or if it's the case the kobolds just have an opportunity to escape and they're losing. Exactly how it happens, I don't want to plan, but one way or another, I'm planning on one kobold escaping from this encounter, fleeing down this hallway, and ideally the players learn about that, learn which way the kobold went. If they try to find the footsteps, it'll be a relatively easy like survival check, and I want the players to know, okay, down this left passageway are kobolds, and there's going to be a whole lot of kobolds. And the players have two sort of meaningful options, as I sort of detail here in this section on the kobolds, because the kobolds are primarily motivated out of expansionism. And specifically, they desire to gain the valuable metal that was mined up in this mining hall, because that's what this hall was for originally. They don't really want to fight the PCs. They're willing to engage in diplomacy, but they're also not friendly to them. So it's going to sort of require the players to do something to appease the kobolds. And they don't really care if a couple of the kobolds die, if the PCs, that doesn't matter to them that much. They care about the metal. So obviously, here, this kitchen is going to have some kobolds in it. Room 3, which is sort of a storeroom, also has kobolds in it. It has one of their leaders. And then 4 also has even more kobolds. This is sort of the natural cavern, added some pillars, sort of changed up the way this looks. There is this doorway. It's not really actually a doorway, but it just leads on to like sort of the kobolds' proper territory. And there's probably a way for the PCs to leave, so the players are trying to get from here, from room 1 to room 15. That's the goal. They can either go the way with the kobolds, right? Appease them, do some diplomacy with them, do some role-playing with them. But the main thing that the kobolds want is that they want the PCs to kill the troll in room number 14. The kobolds do not want to go down this pathway, down to room 5, because the kobolds know there's something big and nasty in there. And they do not want to go into room 14 because there's a troll in there. And the troll in room 14, in fact, is the thing that knocked over the table in room number 1. Right, and now a troll is quite the encounter for a bunch of second-level characters. But there's going to be 5 of them, so I think they're probably going to be fine, but we'll have to see. And it's going to be one of those things where the kobolds might help them if they need. I think the kobolds don't want to risk their own lives if they don't need to. So they're probably going to not, and obviously we can also see there are 2 little spike pit traps. These are the only 2 conventional traps in the entire dungeon. The dwarves did not build any traps because they lived here. And so it'd be crazy if they had to navigate a trap every day to work. So that's sort of the immediate kobold path. No matter what, the players have to get to room 9, which they have sort of, a lot of different options to explore from, and then to room 15. Now the other branch leads to the mine. A mine. And so there is this little passageway down, which leads to a mine shaft. My expectation is that the players are not going to actually really explore down the mine shaft, partly because why would you do that? There's just going to be like ore and stuff. And the other thing is that there is there's a danger in this room. There's a boulette, which is another pretty nasty encounter for a bunch of second-level characters. All the encounters are all designed using the encounter building rules. Here on D&D Beyond, there are 3 books that everybody has access to for free. The basic rules, the monster manual, and Volo's Guide to Monsters. And the Volo's is included because, and you'll see all of them have this weird legacy tag, because all of these stat blocks were updated in Monsters of the Multiverse. Singular Boule is, according to the rules, a hard encounter for, I have it set to 6, but there is a Singular Boule is a hard encounter for a bunch of second-level characters, which seems crazy. It does seem crazy because the Boule stat block is pretty nasty, right? So it only makes 1 attack. It only makes 1 attack, but it does 30 damage on average per hit, which if there's like a wizard in the party, it's going to instantly kill them. That will instantly kill a wizard. 30 damage? That's insane. It only makes 1 attack, but even then, that's still just insanity. So I'm probably going to have to tone down the damage, right? The troll, meanwhile, and this is sort of the issue with, especially at low levels, using big monsters like this. So like I might have to turn down the damage. Now the troll's damage per hit much lower, much more reasonable, but they make 3 attacks per round, right? But here's the thing: it's just the 1 troll. It's just the 1 troll, and so it does need to do that. But yeah, there's gonna be a lot of build up to the troll fight, but there's not really gonna be all that much build up to the boulette fight. I do not expect, or boule, depending upon your pronunciations. Now, going from the mine, there's not really anything of value in most of these rooms. Like the kobolds probably have some gold on them, but nothing crazy. Now there is a sort of another choice, either 6 or 7. 6 is just a set of closed doors, and I perfectly imagine the players might never open up that door. depending upon their motivation. But in 6 it's bunk rooms, right? It's where the dwarves would sleep, and it's just a whole bunch of undead. That's it. It's just some ghouls and some skeletons. That's it. It's really, really bog standard. Now 7, meanwhile, is this little foyer, this little archway, and on the archway is this dwarven runic carvings, which have their ancient glyphs worn with time. And then beyond is a statue, or what appears to be a statue. It's a giant dwarven statue which sort of stands sentinel. It's actually metal, but it's so dust covered that that's not immediately obvious. And this thing is the guardian of this room. And so there are and I know for a fact that several characters speak Dwarvish, so I'm not worried. It's just sort of a fun little thing. And I've got a little poem, a little riddle, if you will. Beware ye who dareth enter Zonagar's hall, for treasure within layeth beyond mortal thrall. Only with the draught's word may thou pass, lest ye awaken thine lord, Moradin's wrath. Moradin is one of the dwarven gods. There's treasure beyond. Well, that's cool. There's treasure. Right, so even if the players have not heard about the armory from like either the kobolds or have not guessed at its existence, then the players are going to go like, okay, there's treasure. Literally the word treasure. But beyond mortal thrall, beyond mortal control. Interesting. Only with the draught's word. Now, draught is a proper noun. It is in fact a title. Now, I'm not going to make that explicit to the players. It's going to sort of be up to them to kind of figure out, to parse this. I don't know how long it's going to stump the players. It might be that they sit here for an hour in-game, talking and trying to figure out this little riddle. Or it might be that they think about it for 5 minutes and they go, well, what this means, we can't figure it out. Let's just keep going, right? And so they're either going to just go in full guns blazing and they're going to have to fight this thing, right? Which is, it is a trap in essence. It's not a literal, it's not a spike pit trap, but it is, in fact, a trap. Because if they do, then they have to fight a shield guardian. Shield guardian is just the stat block that I decided to go with, and it's still, this is nuts. This is like way, I mean, damage-wise, not that absurd, but it's got a pretty good armor class, and it's got a ton of hit points, and it's got regeneration, right? So probably possible, but it would require immense amount of effort on their part. And requires some really, really intricate tactical thinking. So I'm sort of imagining that it's not a fight. I don't know how long that's going to stump them, but that might be for a while. Now past the Guardian is the Armory, and we'll also we'll talk about how to solve this puzzle here in a bit too. But the Armory has some cool stuff. So for one, it's got a really dope magical great axe. Now that's partly because I know one of the party members is going to really love that. That's a pretty cool sort of custom magic item. One of the things is that the players are going to sort of arrive here loot poor, equipment poor. They do not have all of the conventional equipment that they ought to have. Like, they don't have all of their starting equipment. Part of the setup of this dungeon is that, oh goodness, we're screwed. We need equipment. So when the heroes here, oh, there's treasure in this dungeon. Yes, please. Let's go find some. So one of them is a cool Grudge Bearer Dwarven Great Axe. And it's going to it's going to be start at uncommon, it's going to evolve to very rare. I don't have this magic item written out just yet, but that'll be something I probably don't need for a while, actually. Probably a couple weeks from this point. There is Mithril Splint Armor, which is pretty dope, but it's for dwarves. It'll take some time to adjust it. And then an Adamantine Pole Hammer. That's because one of the players is a pole weapon user. And there's just a ton of different random conventional equipment, and then there are 2 consumable oils of sharpness that are +1. Now, there's this octagonal room, which we've got sort of benches, and there's sort of a main speaking. There are several other doors. So there's the one they come in through either from 14 or from this hallway that leads from 5. Now, even then, there are still 1, 2, 3, 3 being either one of those 2, 4, 5 other closed doorways they can see as soon as they enter this room. So this room's going to require deliberation. I don't know how long. It might be very short, but when the players go, we could spend forever trying to figure out which door to open. Let's just open one and see where we can go, because ultimately that's the only real solution. Now this door over here is locked, and there is also a secret chamber. I've got a DC 15 in perception or investigation check. which is not that hard, so I think there's a decent chance the party is going to find it. And then there is also this locked door, and it's a DC 12 Thieves' Tools or 14 Athletics, because it's easier to do with Thieves' Tools. And I actually don't remember if there's anybody that has Thieves' Tools in the party. So if not, then it'll just be a Dexterity check, not modified by anything, or potentially Athletics to just sort of force it open. It might be that they just can't do that. It's just impossible for them. That sort of stuff happens. But ultimately, all of that, the armory and everything in here is optional. It is not required to complete the dungeon. It's just cool stuff that they might pick up. Because past this door is the officers' quarters. And now there's a bunch of stuff, but among all of the clutter is the draught. And draught is that the proper title from earlier. It's like commander. It's dwarven for commander, basically. He has a seal of authority. And that is the answer to the puzzle in room 7 in the Guardian room. So if they walk into this room with the draught seal, then they don't have to fight the Guardian, and they can get into the armory, and they can get all that cool loot. But, in order to do that, they have to fight something. So I currently have the encounter as a Meanlock, which is a Fey. It's not really thematically, doesn't really fit. It's just a cool, I just like the stat block, honestly. The stat block is pretty interesting. It has the ability to shadow teleport. It can paralyze you. It has a fear aura. All of this stuff, great, really interesting stat block. The fact that it's a Fey is incidental. But I like it to be several different things in a combat. So it's also several Dark Mantles. A Dark Mantle is another interesting stat block. So it has the ability to have a darkness aura. Probably not going to use that, but because this room is sort of, it's all darkness. False Appearance, which is interesting, very useful. And then Crush, so it sort of attaches and then sort of blinds them. And so I think the Dark Mantle plus Meanlock encounter might be pretty nasty. That is one hell of an encounter right there. Not in terms of damage, just in terms of the effects that they are going to inflict. So the other adjoining rooms, there is room number 10, which is a little chapel. So there are 3 shrines. The shrines to the dwarven gods, Ard, who made the world. The name is World Ardent after him. There's Moradin, the All-Father, who made the dwarves. And then there is Varda, who made the female dwarves. And there are 2 brothers and a sister, is the family dynamic. But, they've got a little shrine, and there's still some cool stuff. So there's some holy water, there's some potions of healing, which is really important. The players are going to probably be like, oh, thank God, we've got some potions of healing, finally. And then a scroll of protection from evil and good, which will actually be useful against, if they go here first, it'll be really useful against the Meanlock, if they decide to use it. There's also a really random, I just sort of like, what, that sounds fun. The history of Duero Delph, which is just it's a history book. It's got a minor mechanical feature, which is that if you spend an hour to study the book, you can gain advantage on checks to recall information relevant to dwarfs. So that's, history or religion checks, which is incredibly niche. I imagine that somebody might write that down and that it might never come up. But if it comes up once in the entire campaign, that'll be cool. That'll be really cool. With the player that remembers that will be A+. A+ player. So we've got the officers' quarters. There's also, in this little hexagon room, a burial chamber, which is secret. And so there are 6 catacombs, or sarcophagi, excuse me. There's 6 shadows. It's just, bog standard. You have to fight some undead. Shadows are pretty nasty, actually. The shadows have strength drain, might be really debilitating, depending upon how often they hit. So that could be, that encounter could either go really well, could be absolute curb stomp, or it might be deadly. But that's an encounter that the players might literally never do. There might be something cool that I come up with later, but that's what it is right now. There is the refinery / smithy over here. And we've got 2 little anvils, and I just sort of layered some different, that's just a big smithy. There might be something cool in that room, something of value, but, right now there isn't. And that's one of those things is I also intentionally leave a lot of space in dungeons. Whenever I'm designing them, I leave myself a lot of space to actually input little random things. In the bunk room, there's probably some loot. There's probably some equipment or something, but I don't need to put that in, right? That, it's enough for me to say, okay, there's probably some loot in this room if the players fight the undead in it. But it's not going to be huge loot. It's not going to be a bunch of awesome equipment or some cool healing potions and some holy water or the important seal. It's just going to be something conventional. Might be gold, or like a piece of equipment that the players vitally need. And then there's room 14, which we talked about a little bit. There's going to be a troll in that room. I've got another little box text, and there is a mechanical arm. I don't know what the players are going to do with that, but it's going to be there. It's, just like a whole ass arm, mechanical, totally functions. The players will probably pick it up. They might try to sell it, or they might try to like make it into a mechanical dude. I don't know. That'd be really interesting. So there might be other cool, weird stuff that they encounter. I literally have no idea. I just put it in there because I thought it would be cool. And then also a hooded lantern, right? That's just a piece of bog standard equipment, but actually really useful in the Underdark, because having a good source of light that's not torches, right? So there's a bunch of these different potential encounters, but one also trick that I have is random encounters. And so I have 8 designed out encounters here. Not super in love with any of these, but so I might change them on the fly, but oftentimes these are just inspiration, and then during a session, I'll look at these and I'll roll to see which one it is. I did a whole video on random encounters, but pretty simple. I'll just roll a d6, or actually I'll have the players roll a d6. If they get a 6, there's a random encounter, and I'll let the players know basically when there's going to be, when I'm rolling. So I'll roll if it's been a while and there hasn't been an encounter, if they spent like, an hour in game, sat here in the archway to room 8 in room 7 here, just staring at it, trying to figure it out. I'll roll a random encounter, and maybe I won't even roll, and I'll just have it. I'll just say there's gonna be a random encounter because you guys need to get unstuck. So I'll just do one, and I'll roll on this, and then oftentimes I'll ignore it, or I'll be inspired by it. And these encounters are all, legally speaking, perfectly legal according to these encounter building rules. So we'll have to see how they actually fare. And all of the encounters in this entire dungeon were made using this encounter builder. Now, I think Six Shadows might be a TPK. It might absolutely be a TPK. I can reduce the threat in some way, and so the players won't TPK without me intending for it. Without me intending for it to be an option. Now, and obviously you could just say only do medium encounters, but I feel like that's sort of the boring option, right? Because it's not an attritional thing. I want it to be like they fight 3 encounters and then they go, okay, we need a long rest. And I'm expecting them to have to long rest at least once, maybe twice, maybe even 3 times through this whole dungeon. And when they do that, there's going to be a decent risk of some random encounters. I'll just be like, screw it, there's going to be a random encounter, just to break up the pacing. And so between my ability to variably throw in encounters which will eat up game time, the many different things that the players are probably going to ponder, like I think this three sessions out of this dungeon is not going to be a huge ask. And then finally we have room number 15, which is the final room of the dungeon, the Grand Hall. And so I've got some box text here, but basically the way this works is that as soon as they step into this room, it's a skill challenge. And it's a skill challenge to get to the other side of this room without the ceiling collapsing on top of them and them all dying horrible deaths. The players have to avoid rocks fall and everybody dies. It's a 6 success required skill challenge, and this is perfectly reasonable. So the 2 I'm going to give them are acrobatics and perception. So acrobatics is just, you're trying to sleuth your way across, and it's actually got a really low DC, only a DC of 10. And then perception, trying to avoid the cracks as they form, avoiding the strain points to avoid a total collapse. I've only really done 1 instance of this, but in rooms 5 and 6, I'm going to include in their box text, there is explicit the fact that there is mining equipment. And so if the players just decide randomly, there's not really a good reason why they would, but they just might, right? I know players, they like to pick stuff up. So if they pick up some of that mining equipment, it is going to count as an automatic success. And if they ask to use it. And so that is essentially the dungeon. AI is a interesting tool for the modern DM. I have mixed feelings about it generally, but I think it does have its place. And so generally speaking, I used ChatGPT to generate these box texts. Now, when I did that, it was a lot of work, because here's the thing: there is not actually a deserted hall. I can't look at an actual real world deserted hall and just describe it. This is a fictitious deserted hall, so I need to, sort of make it up. And so ChatGPT can be useful in that way. Now, generally speaking, though, it did not provide me results that were useful, and so I would constantly have to continue to feed it and fight with it, basically, in order to get it to produce a result that was actually useful. So, in some senses, it is useful, I think, for creating these sort of box texts. But I rewrote it so much, and it's genuinely a good question whether or not I actually saved any time. versus me just writing, because some of these I did just write out all me, 100% of my own volition. And some of these need some more rewriting in order to be like fully presentable, but that's always the case, right? Like there's always more time you could spend on a dungeon like this. I know all of the major creatures in this dungeon. I kind of know how they interact, right? The boule and the troll are sort of oppositions to the kobolds. The undead are kind of doing their own thing. They don't really interfere with the other things. So because I know all of that, I know this dungeon pretty well, I'm able to improvise stuff. And that's the main thing, is that when you build your own dungeon, you own it, you know it. And because of that, I can improvise things on the fly and fix little mistakes I made. I can change phrasings as I'm saying them to sort of finish it, to tighten it up. And that is my main advocate for building your own dungeon, is that when you do it, you own that dungeon, right? You can't make mistakes with it, right? Because even if you do, you made it up in the first place. There's nothing that you can do with your own dungeon that will screw it up, right? It'll still work. It'll still be a dungeon. And so that is the Hall of Xanagar. As I mentioned earlier, we are recording our D&D games, so if you want to see this dungeon actually get played, be on the watch out for that. Or, depending upon when you are watching this, go ahead and check it out now. As always, any resources I used for this video are in the description below. Peace out.